Hi, Psych. These are your Mod 1.6D Sensation, Chemical, Skin, and Body Senses notes. Lots of learning targets. So, first, explain how the structures and functions of the chemical sensory systems relate to behavior and mental processes. So, structures in the nose and brain process and/or transduce olfactory stimuli. Smell is the only sense not processed first in the thalamus of the brain. Pheromones produce chemical messages for the olfactory system. Gustation is the sense of taste, and types of taste include sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, and oleogustus. Structures in the tongue, mouth, and brain process and/or transduce basic tastes. The number of taste receptors on the tongue is related to how sensitive people are to taste, classifying them as super tasters, medium tasters, or non-tasters. The chemical senses interact to create the sensation of taste. Without the sense of smell, taste sensations are either muted or not experienced. 2. Explain how the structures and functions of the touch sensory system relate to behavior and mental processes. So structures within the skin and brain process and/or transduce touch stimuli. The sensation of hot is produced by the activation of warm and cold receptors in the skin. 3. Explain how the structures and functions of the pain sensory system relate to behavior and mental processes. So pain is produced both in the body and in the brain. Gate control theory is one attempt to describe the complexities of pain. Phantom limb sensation occurs when people who have lost limbs report sensation or pain where the limb used to be. And finally, explain how the structures and functions that maintain balance, the vestibular, and body movement, kinesthetic, relate to behavior and mental processes. The vestibular sense controls balance and is primarily detected by the semicircular canals and structures in the brain. Kinesthesis is the sense of one's body movement, and kinesthesis allows the body to move in coordinated ways without having to look at the various parts of the body as it moves. So we're going to take these by the various types of senses, starting with the two chemical senses. So first up is smell. So smell is also called olfaction. So if you see olfaction, we're talking about smell. And here's how this works, how you're able to smell something like this rose that you see in this diagram. So molecules of the odorant chemicals are carried by air currents and absorbed into nasal mucus, i.e., it goes up your nose, which stimulates olfactory receptors within the nasal cavity. So they're right at the top of the nasal cavity, where they are converted to neural messages before being processed by the brain. So here we've talked a lot about where transduction takes place with vision and hearing. Smell or olfaction transduction takes place again at the top of the nasal cavity. Notice smell is really unique in that the sense of smell is routed through the limbic system, not the thalamus. So one of the main reasons, if we look here, again, olfactory bulb, which is at the top of the nasal cavity where transduction takes place, notice it's really close to the limbic system. In fact, if we had the thalamus, it would be up here. Because it's so close, it's going to be sent right through that limbic system, and more specifically to areas like the hippocampus, where, if you don't remember, is where memory is processed. So for that reason, memory is really connected to smell as well as our emotions. So again, big part of that likely is the proximity. Hey. So what we also need to know about smell is this idea of pheromones. And please feel free to put this into your own words and shorten. So pheromones are chemical signals that are released outside of the body by members of a species that influence the behavior of other members of the same species in non-human animals. For example, it may serve to attract a mate or to act as an alarm. So you can see here just an example with these goats. Male effect pheromones are released from the male, which then stimulates the reproductive system in female goats. You're not going to have to know this many details. I just wanted to give you a specific example. Okay. There is some debate about pheromones in humans, although there is some evidence to show other scents like perfumes or body odors may play a role in sexual attraction and arousal. Pheromones have also been suggested as a cause of menstrual synchrony. If you've ever heard of women being on their periods at the same time, it's possibly because of pheromones. So, question for you. Explain why the location of the olfactory bulb may help to explain why smell is so closely tied to memory. Go ahead and write. So, next chemical sense we have to talk about is taste. So, taste is also known as gustation. Fun fact, if you want a way to remember gustation, if you've seen the movie Ratatouille, the name of the restaurant in Ratatouille is Gustave. So for me, that reminds me, Gustave on a restaurant is gustation, taste. So this is a chemical sense, again, linked to smell as well in determining the flavors of things. So the way taste works, we'll use this diagram. And again, you're not going to need to have this exactly memorized, but this is just to give you an idea. So the tongue is covered with these little bumps, or if you were to feel your tongue or look at your tongue, you'll see them, called papillae. Those are not actually your taste buds, but instead your taste buds are inside those bumps. So if you notice, this is like the big bump you would see on your tongue if you're following my mouse. And then you see these little white, they kind of look to me like little garlic cloves. Those are actually the taste buds. And what makes up the taste buds, this is like a zoomed in image of it, are these little gustatory cells. And these are the cells that actually do the tasting, that are able to tell you whether a food is sweet or salty or bitter, etc. And just the little tip protrudes towards through the pore on the surface of the tongue. Connected to these gustatory cells are the axons, which actually carry those signals to the brain. Fun fact, the tip of each of the gustatory cells is covered with an assortment of bitter taste receptors, which can tell us, hey, bitter. And think about, this is kind of jumping ahead to bitterness here. Bitter is the most likely taste for things that are dangerous to you. So from an evolutionary sense, bitterness was a protective mechanism, but also bitterness is in foods that we enjoy, like coffee, or foods that are really good for us, like green cruciferous vegetables like Brussels sprouts or broccoli. Our receptors are sensitive to 6 basic taste qualities. You should know all 6 of these since they were in our learning targets. These include sweetness, saltiness, sourness, bitterness, umami, which is a really savory flavor if you think of like soy sauce or beef or bone broth, as well as MSG. And then finally, it's kind of blocking down there. Let me move this out of the way. Go up here so you can see at the bottom, there you go, is oleogestis, which is actually the newest taste quality. And that's actually the taste of fat or oil, which is a pretty unpleasant taste most of the time. You don't want to, not even thinking about the texture of it, but just the taste of fat, not real good. Think of it as being not great because it's your body's way of saying, hey, don't eat too much of this. So question for you, go ahead and name. So question, name the 6 basic tastes, then describe them, meaning give me an example of them. Go ahead and write. A little bit more about taste in terms of types of tasters. So, again, we know that these taste cells are chemical sensitive receptors located in these taste bud clusters. Taste buds and papilla are located on the tongue. That's where we most think of them, but they're also actually in the throat and on the soft palate. And these actually reproduce about every week or two, so those cells don't last a long time. People have been categorized into three different types of tasters based on the density of their taste buds. And what that means is there are some people that have a really concentrated number of these papillae, meaning these taste buds. And these people would be known as super tasters. This means that they're extremely sensitive to some tastes, particularly spicy, and most likely really sensitive to bitter tasting foods. So if you're someone that maybe can't stand the taste of coffee, or you have a really hard time eating bitter vegetables like broccoli or Brussels sprouts, there's potentially you might be a super taster, and that's why. Next, we have medium tasters. This accounts for about 50% of the population with an average number of taste buds. They taste bitterness on average or medium level. They're not super sensitive to things like spicy food. And finally, we have non tasters. And these are people who are unable to taste bitter compound. If you look at the image down here, they have a lot less of these taste buds. And non tasters make up about 25% of the population. So think most of us are in these medium tasters, but about 25% are super tasters, 25% are non tasters. Finally, with taste, this is a review for something we've talked about previously, but since it's poignant to set to taste, I wanted to bring back this idea of sensory interaction. So, other things that influence taste or really flavor is the smell of the food, touch, meaning like the texture of the food, as well as the temperature of the food. So I gave you this example of iced coffee versus hot coffee. If you've tried both, you might notice that they taste a little bit different when coffee's iced versus when it's hot. Another example, why I put these starbursts here, is things like smell can impact. If we do things like plug our nose so that we take smell out of the equation when eating foods like starbursts, you might have a hard time determining which one is the pink one or the red one or the yellow one. And that's something that we'll play around with in class as well. Next up is a skin sense. This is touch. So, sensations for touch begin as signals generated by touch receptors in your skin. There are four basic sensations: cold, warmth, pressure, and pain. And fun fact, if we stimulate nearby cold and warm spots, like say on your hands at the same time, you'll actually feel the sensation of hot. The way these work is you have these receptors all throughout our skin, and they send signals via sensory nerves into the spinal cord. Those signals move up to the thalamus, which relays information to the rest of the brain, particularly the somatosensory cortex that we talked about in our next unit. Touch is a little bit more complicated than that. There's all different types of receptors that we could go into, but for our purposes, we just need to know there's receptors in our skin. It's at that receptor level that transduction takes place. Those signals are then sent via sensory neurons, first to our thalamus and then to our somatosensory cortex for processing. So, question: name the four touch sensations. What can be combined to achieve the feeling of hot? Go ahead and write. Okay, y'all, we have two more senses to do. First up is pain. So, little introduction to pain. It's that experience evoked by a harmful stimulus. Pain is helpful because it directs our attention towards a danger and then holds that attention. There's lots of things that we'll talk about that influence someone's pain sensitivity. There is some truth for people to say that they're more tolerant of pain or less tolerant of pain. Some of the things that factor into that are our genes, meaning our genetics, our individual physiology, our personal experiences, how much attention we're paying to that pain, as well as our culture. And pain involves both top down and bottom up processing. And the way you should take that is it's both a biological and a psychological, as well as social cultural. I don't really get into that in these notes, but also a social cultural experience. So, similar to touch, pain is again felt by the body and partly through the brain, meaning what we're thinking about as well. But just like touch, it starts with receptors in our skin that detect things like harmful temperatures, pressure, or chemicals. And similar to touch, it's sent first to the thalamus, but then sent throughout various areas in our cerebral cortex. A major theory that we need to understand about pain is something called the gate control theory. And this theory came about with trying to explain that pain is more than just a biological process, and the idea that sometimes we experience more pain than others, even when having a similar injury. So, first, kind of the backbone of the gate control theory is the brain can only focus on one pain stimulus at a time. So, here's what this theory says. You can kind of follow along on the diagram I have here on the left. So, pain messages from the body travel along these spinal cord nerve fibers, and all other sensory messages travel along another set. And this means that pain messages are an example of bottom up processing because we have to feel all these individual sense receptors. It's all this information that we're building up to this experience of pain. We also know these fibers carrying pain messages have pain gates, which open up during a painful experience. So imagine this impulse, whether it's pressure or some other sense like that, maybe hot. It's carrying it up to these receptors. This right here is a section of our spinal cord, interneurons here. Okay. I want you to imagine like there's an actual little gate here. Okay. There's not an actual gate, but we're going to imagine like there's a little gate that can be closed off. So sometimes what happens with the gate control theory is our body will not allow that pain, that sensation, to travel all the way up to our brain. It blocks it off. So this can happen for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's something like where we're in danger and our brain, our body knows that right now it's more important for us to, let's say, escape the bear that's chasing us. Or if you're an athlete, maybe it's more important at that time for you to be able to finish playing in your game or in your match. So it's going to block off those pain sensations from traveling up to your brain. Then what happens is once you're safe, the game is over, the match is over, that gate, so-called gate, opens up, and that pain signal is allowed to travel up. Another thing that can happen is if there's competing stimulation to larger nerve fibers. So if you've ever had an injury and someone like, let's say you skin your knee and someone kind of rubs your knee, maybe mom when you were little or dad, not on the actual injury, but around near it. It kind of blocks that signal of the pain itself so that it doesn't feel as painful, so it can relieve that pain. A different idea related to pain that's really interesting is known as phantom limb. So phantom limb is when someone feels sensations and even pain in a limb, like an arm or a leg, that no longer exists. So this would be someone who has had, say, their hand amputated or a leg amputated. But even though that hand or that leg is literally no longer there, they still feel pain in that where that area would be. So imagine your leg's not there, but you still feel pain where your leg would be. Okay. Sometimes it's a tingling sensation. Occasionally it's a really painful sensation. And why this might happen is it's thought that the brain's representation of the limb in the cortex still exists. So your part of your brain is still sending signals that your leg is still there or your hand is still there, even if it's not. And I included these images because one of the therapies used for phantom limb was developed by this person right here. He's Dr. Ramachandran, and he developed this idea of mirror therapy. So this man that you can see in the photo, his other leg, his right leg is amputated, but what he's doing is using a mirror. So when he looks down at the mirror, it's as if his brain is going, oh, yes, there's my leg. And then if you can move it so that it's not, say, cramped anymore, it can actually relieve the pain by pretty much playing just a mind game. It's almost like gaslighting yourself into thinking that your limb is still there. Last part about pain is also a psychological, has psychological influences. So things that may change how pain is experienced. One is through distraction. For example, if you're injured, you don't realize how bad it hurts until your game is over or your match is done. Part of pain is based on your memory. Let's say you fall down when you're a little kid and scrape your knee. If you remember that happening a year ago and it hurt really bad, this time, as soon as you fall, you might be screaming in pain, even though maybe it's not that bad, but it's just based on that memory. It can also be changed by what your mood is at the time. If you're in a good mood when you have that injury, it might not be seen as a negative thing and you might not feel pain as bad. So, question for you, go ahead and explain the gate control theory, then describe 2 other factors that influence the amount of pain a person feels. Go ahead and write that down. Okay, y'all, finally, we're at the last 2. I have 2 slides for you to go. So these are the body senses, probably the lesser known of the senses. This is vestibular and kinesthesis. So first up is vestibular sense. Vestibular sense, if you remember just one word for it, is balance. So it's our sense of body movement and position that enables our sense of balance. It's controlled actually in the inner ear. You can see I have this red arrow and now my other arrow pointing to this section called the semicircular canals. So it's actually just above where the part of the ear is used in hearing. And this you may have experienced because if you've ever tried to spin in circles or gone on one of those amusement park rides that spins you in circles, these semicircular canals are filled with fluid. It disrupts the fluid when we spin around a lot, which can make you dizzy. But it's also the vestibular sense that allows us to do, or some people to do, feats like this. We see this figure skater doing, where they're able to still maintain their sense of balance due to the vestibular sense. And finally, we have kinesthesis. This is the sense of one's own body movement. Now, at first, this is going to look pretty familiar or pretty similar to vestibular sense. So let me help you distinguish between the 2. So first, kinesthesis allows the body to move in coordinated ways. And the key is without having to look at your body parts as they move. So a big part of the sense is that helps us have what's called proprioception, meaning you know where your body parts, your arms, your legs are in space in your environment without having to see them. So, for example, if you close your eyes, like we see in this diagram, and you move your arms or just sit there with your arms, you still know where your arms are, even if you can't see them. It is possible to lose your sense of kinesthesis or proprioception, where the only way for you to know where your arms or your legs are is to have your eyes open and physically see them. So, other things this allows us to do, coordination of movements, including things like walking, talking, our facial expressions, our gestures, our posture, etc. Another test you can see in this photo on the right is if you close your eyes, you're likely able to bring your fingers to your nose or touch your hands to each other because we have kinesthesis. We know where our body is in space. All right, all. That is finally the end of these notes. We will see you all in class.